Hi, welcome to the fill-in-the-blank notes for MGMT1000, lecture number 5. We're going to wrap up systems thinking and ethics, and we'll just scroll through some of the stuff until we get down to the systems thinking portion. Okay, so what I want to do is basically walk you through some of these system archetypes from Appendix 2 of the Senge book. And away we go. So balancing processes with delay. Now we've seen some of these before, so this is really just to refresh your memory on a lot of these things. You have some actual condition. And you don't like that particular condition, so you take corrective action. And again, if you look at appendix number 2 of the Senge book, you'll see a nice diagram and much more legible text and so on. So you have an actual condition and you take some corrective action. What often happens though is you have a delay. So you take a corrective action and there's a delay and the actual condition still persists. Now if you're not conscious of this delay, you might take more corrective action and actually throw things out of kilter. So you got to respect the delay, and this will be a balancing loop because we'll be working towards some goal, hence the reason for the corrective action. And the management lesson here is be patient. Right? You've taken this corrective action. That's the best choice of things to do. You need to respect the delay is going to happen, and you actually get to the actual condition. Now, the example that I gave in the lecture a little while ago was that of a hangover, right? So you got a headache in the morning, and you take corrective action, so you take a couple of aspirin pills, and there will be some delay before those aspirin pills will work on your headache. If you take more corrective action, you're going to be worse off than you would be here. So you need to be patient. Okay. Limits to growth. Another system archetype. And let's see what we got here. Well, we have some condition, whatever it might be, and there's some growing action. Right. So we have a condition, some growing action, which improves that condition. And this is a nice reinforcing loop, so I'll draw it like a little snowball with the little trees in the background, or put a letter R on there. So this would be, for example, Axe deodorant. We have this condition, we want to increase market share, so we come up with a really clever ad campaign, and we have this reinforcing loop happening. And then, the process feeds on itself and it produces growth and expansion, and then it begins to slow. And the question is, why does it begin to slow? We don't have any balancing pieces in here, but in fact, we do. We have some slowing action. And again, we saw this with the Axe situation. We had a condition, we had a slowing action where people started associating this particular scent with geeks and dorks, I think was the terminology used. So that was a limiting condition that goes in there, and this is a balancing loop. So we'll put that in there. And so we have this growing action for a while, and then we have slowing action which takes over. And we have some limits to growth, some limiting condition. Now, it's interesting to note what you do if you're a manager and you want to take corrective action. Well, you can do a couple of things. One is you can try to slow this growing action. You might not want to do that because the slowing action over here is doing this. If you address this part. So what Axe actually did was they changed their marketing, and they tried to associate their brand with cooler hip guys versus dorky people and so on. So that's the limits to growth piece. A couple more. Eroding goals. Well, this one, again, is very similar to the balancing loop with delay. So we have some condition, some state we'd like to be in, and we're not quite there, so there's a gap. And we take some action to close the gap or to improve our condition. Right. And then there'll be a delay in here before that happens. And this is a balancing loop, just like we had above. Now, what often happens is you take some action to improve the condition. You're waiting for this delay to happen. The condition hasn't improved. What you could do is you could say, you know what, maybe our goals are just too ambitious. So you have pressure to adjust your goal. Right. And there's your goal. Right, if we just set our goals a little bit lower, we could meet our expectations and close this gap and be done. So there's always this pressure to adjust the goal, and this too is a balancing loop. Right, and this happens all the time. And an example from the news just this week talks about railroads and fatigue of engineers and different things like that. So you know, we need to take action to improve the condition of our engineers. It's going to take some time to implement, and we don't have enough money yet. We have to be profitable, so we have to be efficient, so we have to have these engineers working these long shifts and things like that. But once those conditions happen, once we get past those engineers and we get more profitable and so on, then we'll have the resources to really close the gap. Well, there's pressure on to adjust those goals. You know, what if we just reduce the number of people on a crew and so on and so forth? An impact on the goals. So the goals are eroding versus actually focusing down here on this condition piece. Escalation. Well, we have some activity by party A, right? And that leads to some result for party A. Result. Whoops. Result. There we go. And then we have, I'll call it A versus B. This is the results of A vis-a-vis or relative to the results of B. And then we have B taking some action, right? We have activity by party B that results in their results. B's results, and then we have this comparison again, and A says, you know what, I'm losing this race, I'm going to invest more. So we have some activity here, and this is a reinforcing loop, and this is a reinforcing loop, and we end up with, you know, this situation here going on infinitely. You can see the infinity sign being drawn in there. We have an escalation situation. So the classic is the arms race. The Americans develop some nuclear weapons, and they've got great results. And then the Russians, this is during the Cold War, long before you were born, the Russians decide to ramp up their activity, and then they have their set of bombs, and then the Americans say, whoa, we're losing this arms race. And so they up the ante there. And they get more bombs, and away it goes in this arms race thing. What you want to do to try to disarm this, no pun intended, is to focus on a win-win situation versus an A beats B or a B beats A kind of situation. So focus on the win-win, and hopefully that will result in de-escalation. Couple more system archetypes for you. Success to the successful. So again, we have a couple of parties interested in resources. we have the success of A and the success of B. And we have some allocation of resources, A versus B, and some resources go to A, and some resources, I'll just abbreviate R's, going to party B. And those will impact on the success of B, and these resources going to A will impact on the success of A. And again, these are reinforcing loops, a little snowball with little trees, reinforcing loop, give more resources, more success, and so on and so forth. What happens is, if A is more successful to B, they will receive more resources than B, and then they will go on to become more successful in this reinforcing loop. All of the resources will be used up, and there'll be less resources for B. So the success of B is reduced. And if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's books, he talks about hockey, and the number of players in the NHL who born in the first part of the year, January to June, is higher than the proportion born July to December. And it has nothing to do with anything other than success of the successful. If you're a slightly bigger kid coming in playing hockey, in the same birth year as somebody else, you're going to be slightly better just by virtue of your age. And then, this person will go on to make a rep team, AA, AAA, whatever it might be, and this person will not. And they'll receive less success. And, who gets allocated the coaches? Who gets allocated the ice times? Well, you give it to the good players because you want to really nurture them. And you give the house league players, the lousier times. So that's success of the successful in a nutshell. And finally, tragedy of the commons. So again, we have, A's activity, and this results in gain for A. There we go. And this is a reinforcing loop. So A does some fishing, they get some fish, they're happy, they go buy a bigger boat, they do some more fishing, they got some more fish, and so this reinforcing loop goes. Somewhere else in the ocean, we have party B, and they have their activity. And again, that results in gain for B. Right, I'm going to do some fishing, get some fish, and we have this nice reinforcing loop. Unfortunately, though, these two are intertwined together. We need to consider the total activity, which we often do not. And the total activity, the fish are depleted and so on over time, and there's a delay. Oops. Delay until the fish stocks replenish. And there's some resource limit that impacts on that delay. So we have these balancing loops over here, which impact on both parties. So what happens is A will start to see a collapse, B will start to see a collapse. Why? The total activity is impacting on the total system, not just A's part of the pond and B's part of the pond. So we have a collapse of the stock over time, and this is a tragedy of the commons. And again, I encourage you to reread Appendix 2 in Peter Senge's book for full information on all of these system archetypes.